Alright, so this is the first part of your lesson for today. It is handout 35A, Thought Shot Dialogue Snapshot Chart. And basically this is another graphic organizer to help you organize your ideas for your narrative writing piece for your end of module task. But it also is going to ensure that you have all parts or components of the essay inside your writing piece. So please make sure you take your time with this and really think this through, because once you have yesterday's graphic organizer completed, the escape, and then once you have this graphic organizer completed, it should be easier to write your narrative writing piece. Okay, so handout 35A is a thought shot dialogue snapshot chart, and just like yesterday's graphic organizer, parts of this graphic organizer does not need to be in complete sentences, because again, what's more important than worrying about your sentence structure is actually writing down ideas that come to mind according to each of these different elements. So the directions say to brainstorm as many ideas for each part of the chart as you can that you might want to include in your exploded moment narrative. Okay. So the first part right here is the thought shot. What is the character thinking or feeling? So I want you to think about the character you picked, whether that's grandfather, Masako, Anna, or Carmen, right? I want you to think about what that main character is thinking or feeling in this moment, right? This moment that you picked. Then in this box in dialogue, you are going to be writing what are the characters saying, right? We talked about dialogue are exact words that a character says in a story. So this part of the graphic organizer does need to have complete sentences, at least in the fact of having a complete sentence in a quote, right? So I want you to think and imagine what that character might be saying, and make sure you use the correct punctuation here for dialogue, which includes quotation marks. For example, right, shift apostrophe, which will make your quotation mark, and I will just include something that Miss Toma continues to say is, please make sure you are taking your time to complete all of your. And since I'm shouting it out loud in excitement, I'm going to say I exclaimed it. Okay, so that's an example of a quote, right, that a character can say, character being myself, and so that is an example of what dialogue can look like, or quotes. A dialogue needs to be a conversation, so it just can't just be me talking to myself, but two different people talking to each other. Okay. Alright, then finally we have our snapshot over here, which is using sensory details to describe the scene. So here you see your 5 senses: seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, and smelling. So to help you kind of think more about details in your specific moment that you picked, thinking about the 5 senses is going to really help you use more details in your writing, right? It's pretty boring if you're just describing, I don't know if you remember from a previous lesson where we looked at a passage of Masako talking to Joseph, right? And then being described just what happened in that scene, figuring out that they are going to move together to Yokohama, right? Or realizing what home is, compared to them actually talking to each other and being described the setting and things like that. So having that dialogue and being able to see how characters are feeling and thinking through their words and the descriptions tells us much more information, and is very it's more attractive to the reader and entices the reader, right? We want to draw the reader like we talked about in hooks, and so by including more of these sensory details, it will allow the reader to experience and be able to imagine your story better, right? And so we want to make sure our stories are interesting and full of details, so this snapshot should help you. So I want you to think about what that main character sees, hears, tastes, touches, or smells in that scene specifically. And especially if you picked Carmen, and you picked that moment when she's making tamales with her family, the tasting and the smelling will be more prominent, right? Because as you're making food, there are strong smells that you can smell, as well as you can almost taste the smell as well, right? So thinking about that will help you describe the exploded moment. All right. So please make sure you fill out this graphic organizer first before you begin your official first draft of your end of module, which you will also need to complete today. Okay. And then as always, we need to make sure that we are able to break down our writing piece so we understand the topic, purpose, our audience, and the format. So our format is what type of writing. This is not explanatory writing. We're not explaining facts or something we've learned. Really, the point is to tell a story, right? To explain, not explain, to tell a story about a specific moment that happened in one of the texts that we have read so far, but making up that, going deeper into that moment and making up details, right? But realistic details, because we've read a lot of realistic fiction, realistic details that make sense according to the story and what we know about immigration now. So your format is narrative writing. As always, I fill out this chart in this video so that you just need to copy it down into your classwork. And so it should be exactly as how I'm writing it, okay? All right. So for the audience, we know that our audience is going to be our teacher and possibly classmates. I'm not sure if I will allow you to peer edit this paper since we're kind of doing a test trial with the Focusing Question Task 3 paper. And then our purpose is to create an imaginative narrative. Create an imaginative and interesting narrative that develops a particular moment from one of the module texts. And finally, your topic is a moment from one of our texts. Okay? So you know it's a narrative writing piece. And I'm going to show you a graphic, again, breaking down these parts that need to be included in your end of module task. Elements that are a part of narrative writing, okay? Your audience is going to be your teachers because we are grading your writing pieces. The purpose of this writing piece is to create an interesting narrative using your imagination that develops a particular moment from one of the module texts we have already read, right? Exploding that one moment. We're taking that one little scene and we're making it bigger by including a lot more details inside, right? And our topic is a moment from one of our module texts, and that's it. Alright, so before we continue, I wanted us to reread our end of module task. You need to make sure you choose one of the situations from below, the 4 that are listed. And you need to describe the moment from the point of view of the main character in the text. So that's, again, grandfather, Masako, Anna, or Carmen. And so you also need to base your narrative on what you've learned so far about immigration, traditions, and settling in a new home or moving to a new country. And one more thing I want to emphasize is the 4 different elements of narrative writing, which include dialogue, descriptions of the character's thoughts, feelings, and actions. So thinking about our craft question today, right, of how do I improve narrative writing, I want you to look for these 4 different elements, okay, by making sure you include all of these 4 elements that we've discussed so far in Module 3. And these 4 important elements include 1, dialogue, 2, the character's thoughts, 3, the character's actions, as well as the character's feelings. So I want to emphasize again that you can go back to your previous classwork to see those action, thoughts, feelings, evidence organizers that we pulled from Grandfather's Journey and Tea with Milk to kind of help you refresh what those look like and what that can look like in realistic fiction writing. All right, so what I did here is I made a model essay for your end of module task. I am not going to upload this to the Google Classroom because I don't want you to be tempted to copy my model essay, but instead I am going to read it out loud for you and you can look at it through this lesson video. Okay, so this is what your end of module task paper is going to look like. I put the task sheet on here, I typed it up and made it italicized, so this part is just the direction. So you'll see here the 4 moments that you were able to pick from, and then the text and the author is here. Okay, and so here is what the example looks like. Notice how I have at least 3 full paragraphs here. What I did notice and wrote back for some of you for your focusing question task 3 paper is that some of you wrote only 2 sentences, but remember this is an essay, this is not just a short response, and so you need to make sure that you have at least 2 to 3 paragraphs. Okay, all right, and you can already see that I have dialogue here from the quotation marks you see here and there. You can include more if you'd like. This is just one example. Okay, and I want you to notice if I include actions, characters' actions, thoughts, and feelings. So again, you can see the name Anna is here, so that means that I picked the last moment, Anna helping her mother and neighbors making the keeping quilt. All right, so please follow along as I read this out loud. It's hard to believe I've been in America for more than a year. I've grown so much that I outgrew my dress. I was disappointed because it was one of the only things I brought from Russia. Feeling, right? I miss back home Russia. My mother had a wonderful idea though. She and the neighborhood ladies began making a quilt using scraps from the dress. They used my dress, Aunt Havala's nightgown, and the other clothes we brought from Russia. We had so many people in one room, thinking about the 5 senses, right? What you see. The ladies all sat around our big table and worked on sewing the quilt. At times, I had help too. I threaded needles and handed the woman scraps of cloth. The woman used the scraps to sew flowers and animals onto the quilt. It was like a big party. All the ladies were cheerful as they worked, and it was nice to hear them laughing together. I waited for the quilt to be finished. It took many days. After a while, my fingers got tired from threading needles. Sometimes I wished I could go outside and play with the other children instead of standing next to the quilting table. So again, thinking about the setting, this takes place over many days, right? So this exploded moment doesn't need to be one specific morning or afternoon. It can take place over time. Sometimes I wish I could go outside and play with the other children instead of standing next to the quilting table. I tried to be patient because I knew they were making something beautiful. Finally, the quilt was finished. Time word, right? My mother and one of the neighbor ladies held it up. Anna, what do you think? My mother asked me. I took a step back and looked at it. I stared at the colorful animals and flowers. I ran my hand along the border that was made from my babushka. I thought about the family in back home Russia. At that moment, I worried about them because Russia is not a safe place for Jewish people right now, and there is so much poverty. So see how I included information about immigration that we know, as well as the reason for Anna's family moving to the United States. Okay. I wished that they all could see the beautiful quilts that my mother and the neighborhood ladies had made. I love it, I said. Thank you. My mother and all the women at the table smiled. If my family in back home Russia saw the quilt, I bet they would smile too. All right, so that is your model. I notice how there's conversation that's happening. There's descriptions of the quilts, right? Colorful animals and flowers. There's a sense of touch, right? I ran my hands along the border that was made from my babushka. Her thoughts, thinking about the loved ones that are still in back home Russia. Her feelings of being anxious and disappointed all throughout, but also thankful right at the end. I love it. I said thank you. And yeah, so here is an example of what your writing piece can look like. So again, I want you to really take your time with this and do your best to make sure you have dialogue, description of the characters' actions, characters' thoughts, and characters' feelings, as you saw in that little graphic in this video. Okay? Alright, so please let me know if you have any questions regarding your task sheet or your writing piece. The title of your document should be EOM, which stands for End of Module Task, Narrative Writing. And yeah, so please let me know if you have any questions again. Also, please make sure you are studying your vocabulary on Quizlet. We will be taking a Kahoot vocabulary test at 1 o'clock during our Google Meet session for class 324. And we will have a practice one today, and then your final vocabulary test will be on Thursday. But I will send out an announcement on Google Classroom as well, so that you can have that information available to you.